Good morning, members. Welcome to this meeting of Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available for viewing through the Council website. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones, switching off your video when you're not addressing the meeting, writing speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you're in the hall, you can do this by iPhone or iPad. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it's intended as part of the discussion. Usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If you have to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you rejoin the meeting. Members should speak clearly, taking their time and speaking directly into the microphone when making contributions. And when referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. And if you can focus your contributions on areas where clarification is required or proposing an alternative to a recommendation. So with that, Claire, please could you provide Cedrin and any apologies?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I should say that since the papers were published, Katie Hagman has left the committee, being replaced by John Campbell. Richard Marsh has also left the committee, and we currently have one vacancy. So currently we have 9 members present, 5 in the hall, 4 on Teams. 4 on Teams are councillors Brodie, Dashper, McGregor and Marshall. We have apologies from the Vice Chair, and there's got 4 members currently not present, being councillors Giusti, Ingalls, McCammon and Scobie. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. So firstly, thanks to Councillor Marsh for his contribution to the committee, and also to Councillor Hagman, who I suspect we might see back. But and welcome to Councillor John Campbell, who will be very much welcome. But with that, I think I'll just approve members' remote participation at this point and ask if there's any declarations of interest. No, I don't see any. So that takes us to item 3, the minute of previous meeting on 29th of April. Are we happy to approve the minute? Don't see any dissent, so we'll take that as approved. And then that takes us to item 4, which is the internal audit reports. And there's a supplement pack that hopefully all members will have received, which came a wee bit later than the original papers. We have Richard Fox here to take any questions on the report, along with other officers as may be required. So, opening up to members, or first I should say, Richard, do you have anything you want to add to your reports?
Thank you, Chair. Would it be possible to take each internal audit report separately?
Sounds logical.
If I may introduce the first report on cash handling on buses. This is relatively small sums of money involved, and the issues are now being resolved to my satisfaction. So it wasn't a great situation, but it's now been addressed. Thank you, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So over to members. Councillor Beretti, I think.
Apologies, I'm knocking the microphone apart. Thanks, Chair. Page 9, just a clarity, because I know what Richard had just said, that we're talking about small sums of money, but I was looking at point 4 on page 9, and it said £816. Is that on £816, or is there a K missing?
Apologies, Chair, that is £816. There's no K missing.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, well, that makes it simpler to understand, because quite often when we get these things, there are letters missing like K, which would mean thousands. But thank you for that. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Councillor Stitt.
Thanks, Chair. I agree with that, the action points, but I know Richard said it's a small amount of money, but when you read the pages 8 and 9, low, it's no satisfactory. I know it's small sums of money, but we should be getting more stringent, especially in this day and age when we're struggling for cash. That's all I've got to say.
Yeah, I think it's a sentiment we probably all can identify with, Councillor Stitt. But is there anything you want to add to that point in terms of the low rating in the earlier part of the report?
Thank you, Chair. I think the low rating reflects probably the feelings which you've just reflected, but actually, like I said, it's with management, they've addressed it. We know the money is now being banked on a regular basis. and the controls are now in place and operating effectively. So, yes, it wasn't a great situation, but it has been dealt with.
Thanks for that, Richard. Councillor John Campbell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm looking at page 9 and just part of the comments on the cash is banked promptly. It says that the audit found no income for one route out of Stranraer. The explanation provided was that fares were not being charged as the driver did not have a licence to do so. Is that common practice that we employ people that don't have a licence? I'm not sure if it is or not, but...
Richard, can you help with that one?
Thank you, Chair. I should clarify, I did check with our legal services colleagues. They had a licence to operate the route and were doing so legally, but I did check that. It did raise a concern or eyebrow with me as well. So I have checked and the council was operating legally.
That's reassuring. Thank you. So I think we've got Councillor Marshall online.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a general point, first of all, on the reports, and it kind of links into some of the other reports in the committee about the source of where audit reports come from, because there's an item later on where there's member suggestions, but then there's also other different routes that an audit report can be initiated from. And I'm just wondering, going forward with regards to when we get the reports in the introduction, it tells us the object of it. It gives a summary of the situation, and it gives the assurances that have been sought. I'm just wondering if we could add, if going forward, the source of that, because there's different sources. So it might be a service actually asked for it to be audited, or it could be that the audit department themselves, it could be from members when we have our annual kind of discussion on the programme of audit going forward. So I'm just wondering if that could be accommodating in reports going forward. And some of the questions have been answered with regards to the kind of number of action points that have been raised. With regards to, I think you just kind of explained that Ryber did have a licence to do so. So I'm just wondering why they didn't collect the income, because effectively it's just a free bus service. And I am a little bit worried about DGC buses, and I've raised this recently with regards to the potential. I know it's an operator of the last resort, but the likelihood is that we may actually get more routes that's added to that. And I'm just looking to see what kind of measures are in place, because obviously it's more reactive than proactive with regards to that. So if you get some more routes, then you have to put in place a process. So I'm just wondering, as an overall process being agreed for some of the issues that have been raised in this audit finding.
Thanks, Councillor Marshall. So on the first main point I think you're making was about the origin of where reports come from. And I think
Correct, yeah.
And then there was the second part about the wider, I suppose, process, given that the notion that this is about reactive or looking into something and then discovering practices or control measures where they might not be satisfactory or whatever, addressing those, but then is there a forward-looking approach to this where there's a wider policy or process in place to be ready for things that might come our way? It's maybe not specifically the remit of audit, but I wonder if you could speak to that, and I see Gordon's on the line as well. So.
Thank you, Chair. I'll deal with the first point about the format of internal audit reports, if I may. I was going to touch on this later on the agenda, but I was actually going to revisit or have another look at the format of internal audit reports to be fully compliant with the global internal audit standards. I will certainly take that on board, and we can easily put a paragraph in the introduction to reflect those comments. In terms of the second point, in terms of advice for systems, I can only really talk about the cash handling aspect of this, as opposed to the wider issues about whether we are taking buses in-house or not. Certainly, I'll happily speak to any manager about processes or arrangements or controls in place. But in respect to the cash handling ones, we've obviously looked at this in great detail recently, and we're satisfied with those arrangements, however many routes we start operating in-house. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And Gordon, do you want to come in on the wider point? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor, for the question as well. So, Councillor Marshall, I suppose the first point that I would like to make is this team has been without a full-time substantive manager or transportation manager for probably a year and a half, which didn't help with some of these issues. We're now going through a sort of service redesign, which has brought that part of the service within my remit, which is where we've addressed a lot of the issues that you see within the audit. We have just recently recruited a senior transportation officer as well, and put that into full-time position, which it wasn't before, which again helps to supervise a lot of the processes that we're putting in place, that inevitably prevents these issues that you can see in the audit, and supports the ongoing function of DGC buses when it comes to being operator of last resort. So I suppose I can only give you my assurances that we can now comfortably or competently do that within our structure and within the other support mechanisms that the wider remit of our structure can give that team. Hopefully that gives you a bit of confidence in answering your question.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall, does that, appreciating that we're in the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee today, does that provide some assurance for you?
Yeah, it does give reassurance on this issue. There is, you know, I mean, it just kind of shows you the worth of audit when we actually pick up some of these things, because with regards to, you know, the council's commitment to income maximisation, there's a number of points in here where that clearly is not, and also security of the fund, you know, with putting funding or money into filing cabinets, etc. So I have got a reassurance going forward, but it just concerns me, and that's why I asked about the source of the report, and maybe we can get some information how this one originated, because it seems there's been a few reports recently where it is clear that there is failings with regards to income maximisation, and we're only sampling a small part of the council. And my worry is, you know, is this kind of endemic across the council, that we have issues where we are not maximising income? And I think there's one question as well that remains unanswered, just with regards to if the driver was legal and did have a licence, should he have been taking the cash? And that's a missed opportunity.
No, thanks, Councillor Marshall. So I think there's quite a lot there in terms of what audit can do with the resources it has and the nature of business. There's probably we have to select and choose where we're going to target that resource. And in terms of where the provenance of this audit came from, I think it would have been part of the audit programme way back in the day. It feels probably a long time ago now, but Richard, are you able to maybe add some information to that?
Thank you, Chair. It went, if I'm fair, it went into the audit programme as a result of a wee heads up that something might be wrong within the service. So we were given a hint there might be an issue here. If that helps.
No, thank you. So when you're considering how you present that extra paragraph of information in future for the audit reports, will it have things like there was a hint here, or members chose that, you know? So because I think that's maybe what Councillor Marshall seemed to be getting at in terms of where is the concern arising from, and maybe that's what Vlad can help with now.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I think as Richard alluded, I think we could probably put something into the reports just to give an indication as to the origin as such, and not pinpointing specifics in terms of, you know, an employee raising an issue. It's more about a risk-based approach, and that's in essence what we've got in our overall internal audit plan, is that kind of risk-based approach in regards to one, our planning, and two, that along the year we may well have to deal with things as and when they filter through any of the chief officers, but particularly Section 95 officer myself as monitoring officer and obviously Richard in his capacity. And from time to time when matters of compliance or other issues are raised, obviously we'll target whatever processes are appropriate, and obviously in this instance that's come through to Richard direct, and rightly so that's been looked at in terms of addressing it. I think I absolutely agree with the comments made about the value of internal audit and the ability to do these pieces of work so that we can improve and continue to improve, because it's an ongoing basis rather than just a one-off. And in essence, the ability of our colleagues across the whole of the council to be able to come to us to say, look, I've got a question mark about these processes, would you mind having a look at those? And for Richard and his team to obviously risk manage that and in essence provide reports as and when required, such as this one, and identifying issues such as this one. But I think the most important thing is just in terms of that, in essence, early intervention and prevention, and ensuring that we rectify the issues, and quite clearly that's what Richard's managed to do with the service in this instance.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to another couple of speakers now. So, Councillor...
Chair, I've just come back because I think I did ask the question about is it a missed opportunity to collect that income if the driver did have a licence? And just a final comment on, I think that's why it's important that we get the origin or source of the audit report, because, you know, I think it'd be quite worrying if we're relying quite a lot on heads up on issues that are not right within a service or a department.
yeah, no, Councillor Marshall, I think that the origin point's been well made, and I think that's been taken on board. In terms of the lost opportunity, in terms of the driving and collecting cash, can you add any more to that?
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I can't. There is as I said, I checked through one of my legal services colleagues, and I'm afraid I can't remember the exact legal explanation as to why they were able to operate the service but not collect cash.
I'll maybe look quickly to Gordon to see if he could maybe assist. Thank you.
Yeah, through yourself, Chair. So this is down to a couple of reasons. This particular driver, based on this category of licence, is able to drive the vehicle but not operate on a hire and reward circumstances. So therefore, he couldn't take fares. I believe that the legacy to this one is that because of the difficulty of recruiting that level of driver, this is the only way that the route could be fulfilled with that driver. So perfectly legal to drive the vehicle, however, category licence prevented him from operating under hire and reward, therefore couldn't collect fares. But service manager at the time thought it was important that the service continue, and that's how it did under that banner.
Thank you, Gordon.
Okay, and I think we've got the assurance that that's effectively been addressed now, so that's the main thing going forward, I guess. Okay, thank you. Councillor Beretti.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Now, Gordon has actually just fully answered the question I was about to ask, given that I'd had a heads up on this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's actually on the action point 2. Whilst it's a worthy ambition to be banking the money every day, when we're talking about relatively small amounts of money, is that actually an efficient use of time? Is it basically what I'm saying, is it worthwhile sending somebody along to the bank with 20 quid every day?
Over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As the internal audit manager, I would take a pragmatic view that no, the answer is that a weekly banking would be perfectly adequate. However, this is a management response to say they wish to do it daily. But from an internal audit point of view, if it's small sums of money, a weekly banking is perfectly adequate.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions on this particular item, so if we move on to the next one, if you're okay. So property PMIS, as it's colloquially known.
Thank you, Chair. And in the interest of transparency, I would say this audit was put into the audit plan at the request of the Executive Director, who was new in post and raised a concern about this issue, which we investigate on her behalf. The summary of the system is that PMIS has been with the Council for a great number of years, about 20 odd plus, and previously operated with our previous general ledger, which was PowerSolve. Since then, we've obviously had a new general ledger, and we'll be having a new one in not too long a distant future. And the systems are not talking to each other as well as they used to. And therefore, what management have agreed is to do a full review of this system and the way it operates or interfaces with the nominal ledger is a good response to this audit, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Richard. So any questions on this particular item? No, it doesn't look like it. So I think if we're happy to note both of those, I think obviously it's a reasonable response has been given in the report itself, which addresses a number of the issues, and I think looking at that new way forward is probably more appropriate. But if you want to go on to the next paper, which is, I think, sort of it's not quite an audit report in the normal format, but if you maybe want to speak to that as well.
Thank you, Chair. And again, following the theme, the reason this was in the audit plan was you always try and do a fair representation of looking at each of the services within a risk-based audit plan, which is where assessed care needs came into this. This is a position statement. We've been unable to offer the full assurances we would like, partly due to the resource availability within social work to dedicate a social worker to sit down with us for a couple of weeks to give us the assurance. But we have got some important issues, and obviously we have Rebecca sitting beside me here, and between us we'll try and answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Richard. So any questions on this particular report? Councillor Bretty.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Page 24, I know it says here in the assessment process that you've got 231 new assessments waiting to start audit services, and given what else has been in the report, is there any way to say, right, you need so many members of staff extra to get this down to a reasonable level of time?
Thank you, Councillor Betty. Yeah, yes, you could look at it from that perspective and say that actually we would need, I think, probably 5 or 6. I mean, that's just off the top of my head, new staff members. We are looking within the Health and Social Care Partnership at putting more resource in to enable us to do the reviews within that environment. So hopefully that statistic will come down. I would like to offer assurances, however, that these are looked at on a daily basis by the senior social workers in terms of crisis management and risk assessment, for example. So if there's something that needs to be reviewed sooner rather than later, then that happens. Thank you.
No, okay, thank you, Chair.
Any other questions from members? No, I don't see any online or in the room, so thanks very much for that. I think that takes us back then to our recommendations. So if we're happy to note that we've obviously commented on the reports, but are we happy to note and proceed? Thank you. So then item 5 is the Internal Audit Assurance Report 24-25, and again we have Richard here to take any questions on the report as required. So do you maybe want to say a few words at the start of this, Richard, please?
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, this is my annual statement of assurance for the Council, which is addressed to yourselves and to the Section 95 Officer for inclusion in the annual accounts. As you can see, all my internal audit reports have been before you during the year, so you'll be aware as much as I am as to what issues have been raised. I'm pleased to say that where significant issues have been raised during the year, and there have been a few, that they have been satisfactorily addressed by management. But I'm happy to take any further detailed questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. So over to members. Any questions? Councillor Bretty.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Page 18, the section to external assurance providers and the food standards. I how serious is that at the moment, in the sense that are we looking at something low risk, medium risk?
Thanks, Councillor Bretty. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding it's fairly significant risk, but it's also subject to a number of papers on a regular basis to Economy and Infrastructure Committee, as well as several papers to the senior leadership team. So this has been a concern that the council hasn't been able to recruit its sufficient staff to do these inspections. And there are measures in place, both in terms of thinking about the type of staff we wish to employ and the numbers of staff. But again, that's been subject to separate papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, it's just a question for information, just and it mentions it quite a lot, the Chief Audit Executive. What does that comprise of, or is that just the council's internal audit manager? It just, when I read it in a number of sentences, it doesn't kind of, it's just unclear.
Okay, thank you. It may just be the way the report's worded, but Richard, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you. My apologies, Chair. That is simply me. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnston.
Thanks, Chair. Page 14, 4.4, the first bullet point. It's about the review of information sharing with the NHS. Now, that was part of a scrutiny review a number of years ago. And are you going to carry forward this work to next year to verify if anything's happened or not happened? Richard, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. You clearly have a very good memory. Yes, it was subject to a scrutiny review a number of years ago, and I'm not sure every action from that scrutiny review has been implemented. But yes, I think it would be a good idea to carry forward, and certainly we want to keep an eye on this. I think it's a very important topic. But at the moment, as I said, it's subject to very senior discussions. Once measures are in place, we'll have a review of it with my counterpart in the NHS.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Johnson. Any further questions? Councillor John Campbell.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the report. I'm looking at the recommendations, which is just to note the internal audit's annual assurance report, and that's obviously referenced in the appendix on page 17. I'm just wondering, is that like a standard sort of assurance report that other local authorities utilise as well? You know, obviously we can get best practice learning from other local authorities. I'm just wondering, is that something that we do to enhance the appendix? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is that each local authority has a slightly different format for that. That is the one more or less adopted over a number of years. I'm very happy to review and consider it for next year.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on this item? I don't see any online, so for item 5 then, we're asked to note this assurance report for 24-25. Are we happy to do so? Okay, thank you. That takes us on to item 6, which is the Global Internal Audit Standards. And again, Richard is here to assist members with any questions along with other officers as may be required. So do you want to maybe add something? This is a relatively new thing, so it may be helpful to maybe say a couple of words at the start. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First thing to say is I think members have previously been circulated with a document which was an audit committee update from SIPFA, which is, because subject to copyright, I couldn't attach into this. There are also various other documents available online in which I can circulate to you to give an indication of the standards. In Appendix 1, I've given a very brief overview of the standards. The reason I didn't attach the main ones, it's a 180-page document here, if anybody would like a copy. In essence, most of the standards are similar to what they said before, so it doesn't mean a huge difference to the team. There has been a revision to the audit charter, and there's been internal audit strategy. Now, following on from a previous question, the internal audit charter is very much standardised across Scotland, I confess it was actually written by Edinburgh City Council and adapted to our needs. The internal audit strategy was similarly adapted from another local authority. We do try as much as possible to work in a standardised way to the internal audit standards, adapted to the particular needs of this council. I'm very happy at that point to take any questions.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Bretty.
Yeah, I'm keeping up my tally here. 2 questions, Chair. First, I'll give you the simplest first, Richard. Page 33, the last bullet point on the internal audit mandate, and it says require any employee. How enforceable is that? And the second question on the second bullet point is about all records, both paper and electronic. Now, given that we are doing a lot more electronic work, how simple is this if something goes wrong? And even though I know you've got IMG specialists to do this, but how much understanding do you need to get that information if it's been corrupted or by any other means from data storage?
Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, first of all, I would say that my council ID badge is fairly unique in the fact that it does actually have words which permit me access to any building or speak to anybody. But in practice, you're right that if in extremis, the mechanism I would take is I have free access to Vlad as governance officer and to the chief exec and to the section 95 officer. And that is the route I would go down if an individual employee wasn't cooperating with providing information. And it's similar in terms of obtaining information from any council systems. I work off the council network like all council employees do. I have access to a number of council systems, I won't say all of them, but I can get access onto my laptop for any council system that I'm required to do. If there is technical expertise required, assuming that our BTS department is not part of any concern, they would be the first point of call, or to go externally, but I would discuss that with Vlad. So I don't know exactly, until the circumstances arise, I don't know what I would have to do, but there are mechanisms to address it. Thank you.
And do you want to come back, Councillor Bretty?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not hinting that it might be something that a council official or anyone in the council may have done, but the complexity of cyber fraud is now so vast and so difficult to pinpoint, where we do know that outside agencies do fraud and then leave a trail which may lead to an individual who may have absolutely no knowledge of that fraud being perpetrated. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking of, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you can maybe assist with where best that concern might be addressed.
Thank you, Chair. Can I actually refer you to a later paper? And that is the internal audit plan, where I've made a caveat to the extent of acknowledging that I'm not an expert on cybersecurity, and that I would need to buy in the resources as required. I would also refer you to the fact that we have an information management group in the council with senior officers involved, of which I'm invited to be a member if I wish to be at particular meetings, and that's how I get my assurance. But I'll happily admit, and I have admitted, that I'm not an expert on cyber, to answer that question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, so it might be perhaps worth following up that, knocking at a different door for that assurance, Councillor Bretty. And speaking of doors, it's good to know that all doors are effectively open to you, and I'm sure there are many ways to open a door if it isn't open. But no, that's assuring. So with any other questions from members at this time? So effectively we've been asked to agree both the internal audit charter for 25-26 at Appendix 2. Are we happy to do so? Okay, thank you. And then similarly, note the mandate for internal audit in section 4.9 and agree the internal audit strategy at Appendix 3. Are we happy to do so? Okay, thank you. We now go on to item 7, which is the internal audit plan for 25-26. And again, Richard, pinned to your seat, is here to help with any questions. Do you want to add anything to this before opening up to members?
Thank you, Chair. On this occasion, I think I'll just take questions.
So, Councillor Baretti first, and then Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Page 58, Richard. Immediately in economy and infrastructure, noticed climate change, and there was a space where there was no wording. Risks to be addressed. Surely there must be something you can put in. I mean, quickly I just thought global catastrophe would be convenient, but I don't know if you have anything that might fit into that box.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure I could put some words into the box, but the reality of this one is that as a group of Chief Internal Auditors, we've agreed that climate change is a concern to all local authorities, and therefore we're working as a group to develop a standard audit which will be done across every local authority, and that's why it's included in the plan, because I think we can all agree that actually climate change is a concern and a significant issue to society in general, and that's why it's in the audit plan.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. And it kind of falls on from some of the discussions we've just previously had. But I really, first of all, I think it's just to recognise that Richard and his team of just three do a cracking service, and do a really good service for the council. But it is quite clear if you look at 4.12 and 4.13 that there is probably a lack of resource there, and I think that's highlighted as well when you look at the backlog from 2024-25. It takes up most of the Q1 activity of the department. So really, I suppose most members would agree as well that we welcome the fact that there's going to be a service review of internal audit, which is already underway. I'm not sure when that will be complete, but hopefully that will identify the important role that audit plays, and it will be resourced appropriately. And I think as well, taking on board just the comments in the previous paper, then I would prefer that we don't buy in cyber expertise. It would be great if we could encompass that or attract someone to the team if the team is to be expanded and additional resources put in, that someone with cyber expertise should be kind of maybe on the vacancy if there's a vacancy that comes up, because it's no doubt that cyber expertise is going to be needed going forward. It's not going to reduce, it's going to increase. So I would hope that would be taken on board, but hopefully the service review will identify that there's additional resource required, and that will allow us to kind of do the full programme of audits without actually having to kind of try and combat a backlog from the previous year in the first quarter of the 2025-26 year.
Okay, thanks. So there's a bit of feedback there. I mean, I suppose one of the questions is when will that review be completed? Because it's not in the timetable of the rest of the audit plan, obviously. It's not quite the same thing. So that would be helpful to know. And in terms of the insourcing, if you like, of the expertise that we need, clearly there's going to have to be a business case for that, because it might be nice to have, but it might be hard to recruit, and also we might only need it once a year. So there's a bit of a... Can you maybe explain what the case for that might need to be going forward for cybersecurity, for example?
May I jump ahead of that and answer the cybersecurity question first, if I may?
Yes, of course.
I was at a meeting of Chief Internal Auditors last week. It is recognised that this cybersecurity, along with data protection and data analytics, are very, very specialist skills, who potentially, as you've seen recent cyber attacks on big businesses, true cyber experts actually command very, very good salaries. So one of the discussions is whether, although a shared service arrangement for internal audit as a whole may not be appropriate, but actually some sort of shared service arrangement across Scotland for very specialist skills of cyber might be more appropriate to share those salaries between a number of local authorities. But that's been discussed at a national level.
Thank you, Richard. And just on the point of the time for the internal audit, review of audit.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And maybe just also just to back Richard's point there about the obviously that expertise is very much sought of by both private and public sector, and in essence, as Richard's pointed out, it does command quite a salary in that regard. There are other options obviously that we consider in terms of carrying out tests on our systems and so on, and we have relevant contracts for that. That's all managed through BTS. In terms of the internal audit review, obviously that was very clearly highlighted within the kind of public sector internal audit assessment that was carried out a year or so back, and we're addressing that hopefully by the end of this year. It's certainly within our service plan that's going into Enabling and Customer Services Committee next week. The idea of that, as members will be aware in terms of any review, is in effect look at the best value, which I think is what Councillor Marshall's kind of hinting at, and the need to have the right resources in place for the appropriateness within that, and look at all options. And that includes obviously looking at their status quo, as well as looking at potential best practice that might be out there, both in public and private sector, in terms of options to consider. But we're doing that piece of work. Part of that also involves engagement with members, engagement with the staff involved in, and engagement with obviously the wider council, because that internal audit function serves the whole council as a whole, as well as obviously engagement with our external auditors within that as well, in terms of obviously what they see as potential best practice, and taking that forward. So we're doing that big piece of work, and also the unions, I should say, are included within that engagement as well, and they'll be involved at the various stages of that.
Thank you both. Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, and I think the approach that, you know, the central kind of audit across Scotland are taking, you know, the discussion that Richard suggested about the cyber experts seems a good way forward, a bit of collaboration and just to draw on that service when it's required, but if it's available across Scotland, that would seem a sensible way forward. Just with regards to the internal audit plan appendix, which lists all audits going forward for this year, I take it that also that will be added to that will be the proposals that are agreed at the next item in the agenda. And I'm just wondering, just based on my discussions or my request earlier, that if there is to be a revised internal audit plan issued with the additions to that, maybe we could add an extra column which would actually provide the source of that audit as well, if that's easy to do, and that would be helpful to members, I think.
Thanks, Councillor Marshall. So, yeah, so you're definitely being consistent on that one, and I think Richard's probably want to come back in as well. But just on terms of the next item, I think that's this is the audit plan, and then the other section is going to be the focus on scrutiny review. So it's slightly different, but obviously they'll have to be factored into the resourcing as well. But Richard, do you want to come back on that one?
Thank you, Chair. With members' permission, it is my intention to bring an update to the internal audit plan back to this meeting in November, at which stage, although days aren't specified here, there is an allowance for future audits, whether determined by risk-based or suggestions or otherwise, and that will be the opportunity to reconsider the audit plan in November. Thank you.
That will include the origin, at least to some level. Yeah.
We can do that if you wish, Chair.
So are you okay with that, Councillor Marshall, for now?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor John Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Marshall does make a very good point. I mean, looking at the audit plan for this year, there's a number of things there that maybe Richard could do with a little bit of assistance, shall we say, but I'm not quite sure whether it should be somebody with cyber skills, because there's enough in this plan that doesn't really cover anything cyber in it that I think Richard could probably do with some additional resource. But I'd just like to put on record myself, thanks very much for pulling this together. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Stitt.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a comment. It's on page 59 under education skills and community. I brought it up at the last meeting about recruitment. It's good to see that the overview, it's got to be high level review, because at that meeting I did state it when education department was over 130 odd vacancies.
Just on that point, because Councillor Stitt did raise it at the last meeting, I think, anyway, but you want to maybe speak to that a little bit, Richard, just now?
Thank you, Chair. I probably haven't actually specifically said, but I've had a meeting with all executive directors and service directors to consider what their concerns are, and that was certainly one of the concerns that was raised by our Director of Education in terms of the possibility that the council processes might be causing a delay in the recruitment of staff within schools. And she wanted us to do a look at it to see if there's potentials to address that. There may be none, but we'll have a look at it at her request.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions at this point, so with that we can go to the... Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, I'm looking at this, the plan that Richard has provided, him referring to resources, or Sean referring to resources. I'm looking, and we had Rebecca Aldridge earlier on a report. I'm looking at Q1, social work, oral services, assessed care needs, and I'm gauging that against the last figure was something between 3,000 and 4,000 of unmet care needs. That's 3,000 to 4,000 hours. And then further on page, page 59, it starts here, social work arrangement, ensure completeness of quality of case files and so forth, review and so forth. I'm just looking at this in terms of what we're finding from NHS, D&G, where there's a deficit of some £30 million, and the finger pointing back at the council in terms of social care and not meeting our requirements in terms of finances. Whether this would be covered in the audit, just to what extent we are covering the social needs aspect of people who require it, whether that is part of the audit.
Thanks, Councillor Scobie. So, I mean, notwithstanding, obviously, the well-publicised monies that are needed to fulfil the resources and recruitment issues and all the rest of it, in terms of the hours, there will be something in this, presumably, and maybe Richard can provide that, about are we, if we are carrying out internal audits, will it be looking at our ability to meet what we're required to meet in terms of the provision we're required to provide? So is there something you can maybe help Councillor Scobie with on that, Richard?
Thank you, Chair. As you allude to, there are very significant issues between the Council and the NHS at the moment, and you'll notice that there's an item in the audit plan for me to provide support to the Section 95 officer, whether that's a formal audit or whether that's simply providing our perspective on the arrangements in place. At the moment within the audit plan, there is nothing specifically to address that particular issue. However, I'm very happy to have the discussions with the Chief Social Work Officer to see what we can incorporate into the plan for the November review, if that helps.
Thank you. I'm thinking just around the assessed care needs, because there is an aspect of the assessment, then what might be required to be delivered, the affordability and the resourcing of that. So I'm just sort of wondering if the audit, when looking at that particular item, for example, on page 57, will it also highlight the risk of not being able to deliver the things that we've assessed we are required to deliver, if that makes sense?
Thank you, Chair. I think we may be at slightly cross purposes. The assessed care needs report is the one you have in final there. Although it says draft, that was at the time it was being done, but that's the paper you previously discussed at this meeting.
Beg your pardon. So, Councillor Scobie, anything further to add on that one?
No, it's really just, the impact this would have. And I think back to Social Work Committee, recently where it was not on the decision of the members, but the beds in care homes for right care, right place were reduced from 31 to 22 without any reference to committee taking the decision. I think it was the chief social worker and someone from the finance of department that took that decision. And I'm just looking at these hours, whether those could be reduced without any reference back to a committee. And it's that audit of assessed needs against the unmet care hours. Whether, you know, and Richard's saying that there's been a report made in terms of the work that's been carried out. It's what role we'll play, and indeed, NHS D&G looking for some mitigation from the council in terms of the social care element of that deficit.
Thanks, Councillor Scobie. I'm not sure what this committee can necessarily do to address all those, what's embedded in that statement that you've made, but Richard, I don't know if you can help at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Again, as to which committee this should be discussed at, I'll just, if I may refer members back to, as part of the position statement, service management have acknowledged that one of the key problems or key risks is actually a lack of resource base in terms of finances, but also the ability to recruit the necessary carers to provide the services that society needs. And in terms of when we're assessing needs, as you've alluded to, if that results in unmet need, that doesn't actually result in a care package. These are very big issues to be addressed by social work. I'm not sure, I don't think this position statement's got to the bottom of that, but I think it's will always be subject to ongoing discussion.
Good.
Thank you. So, Councillor Scobie, do you want to come back on that at all?
No, I don't think, there's no purpose in coming back. Richard made his position, and it's an issue that it's complex, but we need to make sure we're keeping a watchful brief on it. My position.
Oh, absolutely. I think out with this committee, certainly, and across the partners that we work with, I think that's absolutely essential. Any other questions from members on the report in front of us? Okay, I think with that then we'll go to recommendations. So if we can note, and we've certainly provided feedback on the proposed internal audit plan for 25-26. Happy to agree that? Okay, thank you. That takes us on to item 8, which is the scrutiny review report. So there's a report for 24-25, and also, Fraser, you're here to assist if any members have any questions. So do you want to add anything to the report in the first instance?
Thanks, Chair. Not really, other than just to say, I think we've got a good number of suggestions from the members, so I guess just a thank you to all those members who propose subjects. I'm sort of in your hands as to what happens next.
Thank you very much. So, members, Councillor John Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Fraser, for your report. Particularly looking at the appendix, the selection and rejection criteria. Now, there's clearly a number of these proposals come under that sort of rejection criteria, particularly rejections 2 and 3, at the bottom of page 65. So it doesn't really leave us much room for selection, but if I make a start for 10, say, for example, D on page 62, which is the financial and operation viability of the vehicle repair workshop, might be a good one to start for 10. But as for the others, I'm open to listen to other members and see what they come up with. But the other one that really caught my attention was the road defects repairs. Although it's we've got to be careful that we don't duplicate other reviews, which is in your report here, Fraser. But maybe start with D and listen to other members, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. Anybody else want to come in this? Councillor Stitt.
Thanks, Chair. looking at the proposals, well, we've had a good discussion. We would probably look at A and B, but if we could sneak in F and G as well, it would be handy, because I think, honest, when you see the other proposals, everything could merit, but I think we're happy with A and B, but we'd like to see like F and G getting squeezed in if possible.
Thanks, Councillor Stitt. So just in terms of, we're invited to agree up to 2, but but I do sympathise, because there's across the various suggestions, there's sort of elements of which and I think in the commentary it does kind of allude to, well, there's going to be information coming on certain aspects of this, and again, it's about avoiding duplication. But Fraser, would you be able to help just about some of the parts of the likes of A and B and F and G that might be getting addressed elsewhere, but and what we could maybe take forward through this committee?
Thanks, Chair. So I'll just work through them in order. So with regards to option A, about the reviewing of the matching process, that would probably take the form of a kind of very high-level review. It wouldn't really be looking into any specific cases if it were to go forward. Also, we can't really touch on sort of, I suppose, HR matters. I'm sure Vlad will keep me right here. And I think following, the meeting in January, I think officers went around the various political groups to discuss the matching process. So I suppose it's up to members if they feel that kind of discussion was, provided the appropriate level of assurance. That might be enough, but it is a viable topic for a review, but it's just making best use of kind of member and officer kind of time, really. With regards to option B, the settlement agreements, I believe that also came from previous meeting of the committee. I think an advice note was issued kind of via the leaders panel. I don't know how widely that was disseminated further from that. Again, if the committee were to carry out that scrutiny review, it wouldn't be able to look at any specific cases. HR matters, and also it could also potentially reveal, I suppose, negotiating positions potentially that the council kind of takes. So we would be kind of careful not to do anything like that. If it's more looking for the assurance that processes are being followed and it's been managed appropriately, that could be something that internal audit might be better suited for. I mean, scrutiny, in my mind, tends to work better when it's focused more on performance matters. If it's more about the controls, I would suggest that sits more on the audit side of things. It depends really what are members looking for if they wanted a review of that to take place. Option F, the road defect repairs. Yeah, so highlighting that there's kind of 2 internal audits going to be taking place, that's not trying to put members off the suggestion. It's just to sort of say, this is also a live issue, and I believe those 2 did originate from the service actually requesting Richard's team look at them. It was really just to highlight that we would try our best not to duplicate it, although it always will, just through the nature of that particular subject, for wanting a kind of fuller look at that and how we're performing in terms of, are we repairing them, making best use of resources to make those repairs, are our systems in place to ensure they're able to be reported effectively, etc. Again, it really depends, what do members want from this review. In regards to the service level agreement proposal, I think there's a report at Education next month looking at kind of service level agreements as they relate to leisure agreements. I believe they do form the majority of service level agreements that the council has entered into. I'm sure there are others which, to be honest, I don't actually know what they are off the top of my head. Again, it'd be a very, very focused look at those that do not fall within the kind of leisure agreement remit. So it would be a very kind of potentially quite a small and very focused review. And I think as well, the education report, I think, is due to sort of show or demonstrate the new kind of process as to how the council enters into service level agreements. So it's sort of, would that provide the members with the appropriate level of assurance that the process has been reviewed and updated to provide greater kind of controls, etc., would a scrutiny review be able to deliver anything on top of the work that's already been done? Potentially, yes, but it's really up to members. I hope that was at least mildly helpful.
Okay, well, it'll keep us going for now, I think. But Councillor Beretti?
That was excellent, Ross. I'm not going to beat that in time, but hopefully I'll do some damage. The last two, F and G, I think, as the report says, there are, in fact, reports coming to various committees. Looking at the list, I agree with Councillor Campbell. D should be on it, and I would also suggest E. One of the interesting things about D is that we are at a transitional period where vehicles are going from internal combustion engines to fully electric. We don't have a baseline figure for how much an internal repair workshop actually costs, because once we get into that phase where we've got more electric vehicles than internal combustion engines, the complexity increases enormously. So therefore, we are looking at having to get in specialist people to work with these engines, including the internal combustion engines and the mechanics. So although the mechanics, running gear, suspension, wheels and stuff like that are similar, the two are completely different. So having an operational idea of what it costs at the moment and then potentially what it might cost, I think would be a useful indicator going forward, because it is going to happen. And having seen the actual site as well, vehicles can be laid up for weeks and weeks on end whilst spares are being brought. If vehicles are sent out to an external source, what is the complexity of vehicles being held up in storage and not being able to be used, and then is there a charge cost for that vehicle to be in that storage? So I think there's a lot of complexity in this, so I would suggest D is quite a high priority.
Thank you. So, Councillor Marshall?
Yeah, it looks as though we've got different views on this, so it's really just to propose A and B.
Okay, I was going to try and find another way, but Councillor John Campbell?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, if we could probably come to some sort of agreement amongst ourselves, I think that would make sense. No, just to pick up on G, although Fraser mentions about the review of the leisure agreements, but it's not the only service level agreements, shall we say. It's not just the leisure centres that have service level agreements, and I'll make a statement of connection with the Swestrons Chair that the Swestrons should have a service level agreement included, with the council. So, and there's others as well, property that's being used, council property, you have service level agreements in there. So I take it the service level agreements would cover all, not just the leisure. So, yeah, but I do take your point on that. I'm a wee bit worried about A and B, because I don't think we really know exactly what we're actually looking for there, apart from just looking at the process. And I don't know if we would actually glean anything from that particular thing. But Councillor Beretti made a good point about, if we're moving away from internal combustion, things like that, has the repair workshop got the facilities, does it need upgrading, for example, and things like that. So I would stick by my starter for 10 on D, but I'm not fussed about the rest, but as long as we agree to D, I'll be happy with that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Whilst I think A and B are worthy of some form of investigation or some look into, I'm not convinced they require a full scrutiny review as such. We then go on to D, the vehicle workshop. I've got a bit of sympathy for taking that one forward, because it's definitely worth looking into that we're getting value for money, because that should be an important consideration within the organisation. But then equally there's the question of what form the vehicle workshop's going to take going forward as well, which, because there could be substantial change in that area, if I'm allowed to say that, but, but there could be. And again, I think the road defects one's worthy of a look as well. So what I would suggest, my choice would be to look at D, consider value for money going forward as much as the current situation and what we do with that. Again, with my long memory, as Richard pointed out, I remember being involved in the scrutiny review of the building the local economy park, because it was basically about the same time as the one about the information sharing with the NHS. So I don't think it would do any harm to have a wee look at that and to see how effective or otherwise it's been, but whether you feel, do you feel that would be a useful part for a full scrutiny review, or again, is it something that's just worth investigation?
So with regards to the procurement efficiency and local economic benefit, yeah, there was a scrutiny review at the same time. I think this committee, we held a seminar and then we took a follow-up, or I brought a follow-up report to the committee, I think in mid-2021, to provide an update on what had happened since that review had kind of been agreed, and the implementation of the various recommendations. So I think that was kind of closed off at that point. From what I remember, members were at the time fairly satisfied with how it had been sort of implemented. In essence, this one were to be chosen again, it would probably be covering similar ground, to be honest. But I appreciate the world's moved on since 2019 significantly, so I'm entirely in your hands, really. If you want, there is merit in it going ahead, certainly, but I think procurement has had, I suppose, quite a few reviews in the past couple of years, and I think the FPT review, I think they've only just finished providing update reports on that last year in terms of how that's been rolled out. I'm aware procurement do take, I think it's their quarterly reporting to enabling customer services. I think they do include information on spend in contracts with local suppliers. I can't right now remember quite how much detail that goes into, if it's just a list and an expenditure. I don't know if that's sufficient for members there, or whether or not you feel you would need a further kind of deep dive into that. I'm in your hands.
No, I mean, does that sort of answer your question, Mal? Okay, so go on.
So we've dealt with that bit, I think, and so if we'll just cut to the chase, or I'll cut to the chase. I would be supportive of D, and I would be supportive of G, with looking at a broader number of service level agreements, because I think that is something that would be worthy of a review.
So far, what I'm taking on board is, so obviously Councillor Marshall's put forward a proposal to take A and B forward. I'm conscious that I'm sort of acknowledging the response that relates to it might be more suitable as an internal audit for B, but again, if there's a way to take forward that concern of members, there's maybe a way to do that in the appropriate place. And I would think that's maybe something we could pick up as part of an internal audit look. It's just a suggestion at this point, so forgive me for just having a wee think. There does seem to be a agglomeration around D for various reasons, but again, it's going to be in the hand of this committee. I sympathise with the fact that there has been a lot of work with the procurement over the past few years, but the world has moved on again. However, we do get better reporting generally on procurement and local benefits, but doesn't mean we shouldn't have a look at it. The road defect one was one that was my personal favourite, but only the last sentence, insofar it was looking at council delivered repairs, because we have had information about utilities, about contractors, but the bit that, this is just in reflection of a site visit to a local concern yesterday, which was a council delivered repair, where that's the bit that the concern seemed to be from the constituents, and that's been our mission kind of since 2022. Whoever's been sitting at this table, which is road defects. And I think how we do that is important, but that's just my view. In terms of G, yep, sympathise with that, but it sounds like from what's been said, it might end up being quite a small look at what's not in the education side, although there will be some there. So in terms of workload, how big, can we get 3 reviews out of, if they're small, or 2 big ones or whatever, and could we do an audit with it? So it's just, how do we balance the resource to achieve as much as possible, basically, even if it's very narrow scope in some cases?
Probably could squeeze in 3 if one of them was small, but I see Vlad's wanting to come in, so I'll leave it for...
So I'll let Vlad come in first, and then I appreciate Councillor Marshall and Councillor Beretti are waiting.
Yes, thank you. I think members have maybe alluded to capacity and resources within the teams, and we've identified what is within the capacity of the team. Anything other than that is going to spread us too thin. And bear in mind that the resources that we have dedicated to scrutiny reviews is not just what you see in front of you, but also in terms of the relevant services and the impact that that has in terms of doing due justice to the request for a proper scrutiny. And therefore our strong suggestion is that we should stick to that identified resource of those 2 scrutinies. However, in terms of maybe just trying to mediate a way forward, is maybe you could have a 1, 2 and 3, and if we do get the capacity to deliver, then potentially we can move that forward. But it would be on a basis of we'll definitely do 1 and 2, and if we have the capacity and availability, then we could take number 3 forward. But also number 3 forward could potentially be for next year's scrutiny plan within that.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, Chair, and thanks. And obviously, in the spirit of consensus and listening to other members, and also taking on board your comment on B, which could be an internal audit, and that could be taken separately. I would kind of agree with. I think the 2 main ones, and maybe the third one. I think the first one could be D, because a lot of members have actually raised that. I think G, although there's an ongoing review of service level agreements in education, skills and community wellbeing, there is also other SLAs. But I think if you look at the title of it, I was quite keen to actually including member involvement, because I can remember a time when all SLAs, or the vast majority of them, members used to get sight of them at the various committees and agree them for obvious reasons. And so it's about looking at that process, because I can't remember the last time that members seen or agreed a service level agreement, even though the council is entering into a lot of those, which obviously has a cost implication. So I think to look at the review, not solely on the SLAs themselves, but also the member involvement and why it appears that they are no longer subject to any kind of member agreement or scrutiny. So I would go for D and G, and the third one that you suggested going forward, but D and G would be the 2 I would agree, and I think most members have actually mentioned those 2.
Thanks, Councillor Marshall. And just on B, presumably the intention would be, if possible and we have the capacity, could that be looked at in terms of internal audit, as suggested?
Yeah, put on the list, even if it's not done this year, next year, but hopefully this year.
Sorry, Vlad, do you want to come in on that one?
Yes, thank you. And that's something that certainly, just looking at Richard at the moment, we can look at and look into, but also probably important, we're also content to have, I think, a discussion with our external auditors on that in terms of, what would be best. So we'll have that discussion between external audit, internal audit and myself in terms of taking that forward in some form.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think Councillor Beretti.
Yeah, well, 10 points have gone. Maybe I can go for the 5. I would say E, if it's important, because as Ross said, the last time this was done, things have changed, moved on. that our economy is very much dependent on geopolitical factors as well. And it would be interesting to see, and as Councillor Johnson has alluded to as well, it's what drives most of us to look for ways of increasing D&G economy. Yes, I mean, if there was any process left, then I would go for G, but I think E, economic benefit, is the one that needs to be looked at.
So I think Fraser will welcome your response to that. So it looks like, or so far anyway, it looks like B can be picked up, internal audit, or possibly with recourse to external audit, and maybe a conversation had at that level. And I think that can get taken forward if members are happy with that. D did seem to be one that most of us felt should be in the mix. Maybe there's a first priority, or otherwise I don't see anybody particularly disagreeing with that. So if we take D's in the bank, B's elsewhere, we've got that, and then I suppose we're looking at, so there's a bit of interest in E, but also G, and I'm sympathetic with the service level agreement side, X-education, and the member part of that, which is what that process is looking at. So again, we've got one in the audit, one in the bank. Members, what do you think? So because there's still a bit of interest in each of them, because they all have merits to a greater or lesser extent. Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, I propose G second and E third.
Okay, so and we did say we would look at a 1, 2, 3. So everybody happy? We've got D, then G second, E third. That's the proposal. Are we happy to go with that? Okay, done. Thanks very much, folks. Okay, well done. So are we happy to sort of note that as intended? And obviously there's a bit of maybe refinement about what the specifics of what we're looking at in each of the, particularly around G, I think. But okay, thank you. So that takes us to item 9, which is the membership, constitution and terms of reference for the Joint Safety Committee. We have, I think, Stuart Clanahan and Sue Hawken-Pettick here. I think it says in my sheet here. So anything you want to add, either of you, Sue or Stuart, to the report, and then I'll open up to members.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing really to add. It's a procedural report, and there's been a good level of engagement, discussion and consultation. Approved at the Joint Safety Committee on the 23rd of April, and nothing further beyond that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stuart. So over to members then. Councillor Barretti.
Just a quick one, seeing as I'm going to ask a daft laddie question. Is this a council committee or otherwise? What is it?
So I think it's an outside body, and I think we provide support for it. Technically, I'm not sure, but I stand to be corrected. So perhaps Stuart or sorry, I'll let Vlad come in first, and then other people after that.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Sorry, it is on the list on the council scheme of outside bodies. It is chaired by union safety reps, but council members and officers sit on this committee.
Thanks, Sue. And Vlad, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think as stated in 4.5, it's deemed an outside body in that kind of independence type scenario, and hence is for noting purposes rather than actual approval, because the Joint Safety Committee itself will obviously decide its own terms within that as an outside body, but it's important that we have that transparency with audit, risk and scrutiny as it's set up through that process originally.
Okay. Thank you. So hopefully that helps answer the question, Councillor Barretti. Any further comments on this one? Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thanks for the report. I was looking at the review process on page 68, 4.6, and this revision is presented to elected members following consultation, obviously of the group. And in particular, you've got two appendixes. You've got the appendix 1, which is the constitution in terms of reference, and also the membership and constitution of this particular group. And I welcome this report coming here. I'm just wondering, has this report been, finalised through that particular group? you know, I mean, if it's an outside body, surely it's up to them to have a look at the papers and then agree with the substance of the papers before it gets brought to this committee, I suppose is the question I'm asking. Thanks.
Thank you. So,
Yes.
Sue?
Yes, at Joint Safety Committee, the full committees, that's all members of the Joint Safety Committee, which consisted of the branch trade union, safety representatives, elected members, management officials, was unanimously agreed that we'll revise the committee. And then we had a few volunteers, including representatives from each of those areas, including Council Drifeborough, Karen Brownlee, Director, Transport and Infrastructure, and branch safety union reps. And then it went back to committee, Joint Safety Committee on the 23rd of April, and it was fully approved at that Joint Safety Committee by all members.
Thanks, Sue. Councillor Campbell?
No, thanks very much for that response. The second point I wanted to raise was the membership, which is on page 72. It says at 3.0 membership, nominated assistant director or heads of service to represent their directorate, so you've got a minimum of 1 per directorate. Nominated elected members, which is 6 from this particular committee. And I'm just wondering, does it have to be audit, risk and scrutiny that the membership has to come from? Because surely it would be a whole council approach when it comes to safety, the safety aspect that we look forward to making sure that we are following the right process and procedures. So, because if you've got 1 for the directorates or head of services being a member, that's right across the council, but you're only getting 6 from this audit, risk and scrutiny. Would it not make more sense membership from full council? It's a kind of daft laddie question. So,
I mean, so it's an interesting question. I think on the one hand, the first 3 questions dealt with the fact that this is an outside body and it's the Joint Safety Committee that's effectively put this forward. So on the one hand, it wouldn't really seem right for the council to tell it how to set itself up, as long as we're meeting whatever requirements we are, you know, we have to in order to enable and support the Joint Safety Committee. But yeah, so I don't know if Vlad, you want to come in on that one?
Yes, thank you. And I think it's a valid question. It's actually one that we've thrashed out in terms of trying to bring this 2 members. And is, I think more than anything for that kind of transparency and accountability element of it, it's right and proper that audit, risk and scrutiny get to see it. But we have asked the questions around the membership and the origin of that membership. In particular, I think it probably raise the points in the delegations to Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee in terms of that overall scrutiny of health and safety, and therefore that's why it sits here. And I think that's right and proper, just simply in terms of the delegations to this committee, and thereafter the appointment of the membership into that outside body flowing through here, I think is the right approach. Obviously we can consider other approaches, but I think that's right in terms of that scrutiny of health and safety, not in terms of the health and safety service as a whole, which obviously sits elsewhere.
yeah, no, thanks for that, Vlad. It just, initially when you look at the membership, it looks as if it's kind of top-heavy council-wise, shall we say. You know, when you've got either the assistant director or head of service and then 6 elected members, plus you've got the human resource manager as well. So, it's, but I realise that all these need to be together in one place to take forward what this report's referring to. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Councillor Campbell. So I don't see any other hands up for questions. So with that then, are we happy to go to the recommendations and effectively consider a note to the updated refreshed membership for the Joint Safety Committee? With that then, I've got no notified urgent business, so thank you very much for your contributions today, and I'm glad we managed to reach a happy conclusion for the scrutiny reviews. But no, thanks very much folks, and thanks to everybody involved, and enjoy the rest of the day.